Excellent. Welcome, everyone. My name is Rachel Zarowin, and I am the Communications Manager for Circular Action Alliance Colorado, and we are thrilled that you are spending your morning with us. I'd love to hand it off to Rob and my other colleagues to introduce themselves, and then we'll get started.
Hi, my name is Rob Ritz, Director of Operations with Circular Action Alliance Colorado, and I'd like to introduce you to Morgan.
Hey everyone, my name is Morgan Bachman. I'm the Operations Coordinator for Circular Action Alliance Colorado. Thanks for being here this morning.
Excellent. Yes. And so we're really excited to talk to you today about reimbursements. I am going to go over a couple of housekeeping details. As you may or may not realize, we are recording. So a recording of this webinar will be posted to our website next week. And we'll also send out an email to all the registrants with that recording. So I do want to focus, as you see on your screen here, this webinar is specifically focused on reimbursements for local governments. So if you are not a local government or you are not interested in reimbursements, you may want to protect your time, and we encourage you to do that. So we will offer an opportunity at the end to address questions. So if throughout the course of this webinar you have questions, please go ahead and use the Q&A feature, which should be right at the bottom of your screen, and go ahead and pop those questions right into the chat as we go. So keep in mind too, one of the important things about what we're talking about today, everything we're talking about today is proposed. And what that means, and we'll get into this later, is that we've submitted a plan for approval, but that plan is not approved yet. So I want to caveat that. And now that we have that out of the way, we're going to go ahead and get started with our first slide. So as you may realize from those introductions, the Circular Action Alliance staff on this call are not lawyers. So if you need legal advice, please talk to your attorney. And we can go to the next slide. Yep, and another thing to keep in mind, we're not going to get into pricing, profit margins, salaries, nothing like that. So don't even bother posting those questions into the Q&A. And then I think we can talk about what we have coming up for you. Great. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what is EPR, and then Rob is going to get a little bit deeper into reimbursements and how those work in Colorado's many different types of communities. Like I said, we will have an opportunity at the end to field questions. So if we jump into that first slide, what I do want to let you all know is that I think many of you on this call probably already have some foundational understanding of what is producer responsibility. If you have staff members at your jurisdiction that need to learn more, we had hosted a webinar last month for EPR 101. It's about a 30 or so minute recording. I think we're going to post that link in the chat. Please feel free to share that with your colleagues. That's a great way for anyone to catch up on the basics. That being said, I will go through some high level stuff today, and that producer responsibility is a policy approach. So it's a law. And what it does is it says, hey, local governments and residents, you are no longer covering the costs to recycle, compost, or otherwise dispose of packaging and paper. Now that financial piece lays on the shoulders of producers. So producers are often brand owners or retailers or restaurants. And they in Colorado will be fully funding the collection, sortation, and processing of packaging and paper. So to do that, they pay dues to our organization, Circular Action Alliance, and those due structures can incentivize design choices. Now, what that means is that if a producer chooses to package their item in 60 layers of wrapping or whatever various materials that maybe don't belong in a curbside recycling bin, that producer might pay more in dues than, a producer who chooses to package something simply with one material that anybody can just pop right in a recycling bin. So that's how those due structures incentivize responsible design choices. And we can go to the next slide. As we think about how producer responsibility is implemented, that is through the Producer Responsibility Organization, in this case, Circular Action Alliance. So it is our job to help producers comply with the law. And to do that, we have to develop and implement the program plan, which is then reviewed by a state-appointed advisory board. They're doing that right now. And then the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment ultimately needs to approve that plan. So if we go to the next slide, you can see that we were founded by, oh, no, jumping ahead here. So packaging EPR. Yeah, we can still go to the next slide. So to keep in mind, what we're talking about today is packaging EPR. There are many types of producer responsibility programs, but again, we're focused on packaging and paper EPR, and Colorado is not alone. So Oregon kicked off their program earlier this year, and you can see several other states where are active as a producer responsibility organization, or states have enacted producer responsibility. So if we go to the next slide, we can see these are the brands and that founded Circular Action Alliance, and I think the logos speak for themselves. And what's important to note for this group is that, you know, at our core, we're here to help producers comply with the law, and also part of our mission is to work with local governments, businesses, and communities to reduce waste and to recycle more. So as you learn more about how that happens and you learn more about reimbursements in Colorado, remember, it's all in support of reducing waste and recycling more. And with that, I think I'm going to hand it off to Rob to help you learn more.
Great. Thank you very much, Rachel. We appreciate it. We're going to dig into some kind of overview of our landscape in Colorado, and then we'll get into some discussion on reimbursements and some scenarios of different collection models and how local governments may intersect those. So first, I want to just kind of talk about the different elements or components of EPR here in Colorado. As many of you are probably familiar with, it is a process of collecting dues from producers based on the amount of tons they put into the community or into the state of Colorado. Our role at CAA is to help use those dues to help the producers comply with the law and help pay for the recycling services. So that is like the upper right gray of this diagram. The services are for covered entities. In the case of our discussion here, we're going to be focused on residential covered entities. So much of this discussion today within residential is focused on single family homes and small multifamily units. Then we use the dues collected to pay for the recycling services, education and outreach, collection, post-collection activities like material recovery and transfer, and then also funding to help reduce contamination and increase recovery in compost facilities, as well as following the material to the end market and ensuring that they are delivered to responsible end markets. With that said, we will be focused here in this blue circle, right on the collection and the education and outreach parts of the reimbursement process. So a quick review of where we're at today in terms of the timeline towards the plan approval. We are in the middle of the diagram here, which says AB Review 2, which stands for Advisory Board Review 2. Currently, CAA's revised program plan or plan proposal is in the hands of the advisory board for that review, and I believe they are nearing the end of the 45 days. Probably by mid-August, they are making their recommendation to CDPHE. Now, we assume that is a recommendation to approve. CDPHE enters into a process of review as well, including public comment. The important note here for us then is that we anticipate that CDPHE may approve our plan in mid-December if all things hold and we continue on the cadence that we have been. So that's an important note for this discussion. We are assuming a mid-December approval. And so some of the dates that we may discuss are really based on that assumption that CDPHE makes that approval in mid-December. Okay, so how are we going to begin that implementation upon that approval at that point? The law says that the CAA must begin implementation within 6 months of that approval. So we view the ecosystem for recycling for paper and packaging in Colorado kind of in these 4 buckets that are on this presentation. Reimburse for existing services, boost participation where access exists, and build capacity in underserved areas where we may need to develop infrastructure over a long-term effort. And then certainly enhance the systems and recycle more items and new types of materials that are not traditionally recycled. But today, we will be focused on this blue circle area reimbursement for existing services. So a lot of our discussion is oriented around local governments who have services today and would like to be reimbursed for those services. So how will reimbursements work? First, I just want to kind of orient us to the law or the act. The statute requires that CAA is the pro to reimburse the recycling services costs of the recycling services provided by service providers under the program. So for us, and as well as the act, a service provider means a public or private entity other than the producer responsibility organizations, other than us, that provides recycling services in the state. So that means a local government that provides services today can be considered a service provider. And we're going to review how reimbursements for local governments will work with CAA for single family and small multifamily residential. So within that, we're going to focus on collection and drop-off and education and outreach. Now, there are local governments, though, that do provide material recovery facility services or may own a MRF, as well as transfer stations or transfer facilities, as I've called them here. Those are not our focus today, and they'll be the subject of future communications. We will touch on them a few times, but our focus are the top 3 bullets. Okay. So one thing I'd like to point out in these slides in the upper right, there's a circle that will appear frequently on these slides. It is a reference to where in the plan proposal we're talking about as we're talking through this. So in this case, as an example, this approach to reimbursement is described in section 6.2, chapter 6, section 2, and also in table 13. So when you get these slides later, certainly use that resource to help direct you to that point in the plan proposal. There will probably be a few reminders here that we highly recommend that you read the plan proposal as well, in particular, this chapter 6 that addresses reimbursements. So the overall, we painted this approach in the plan that is we broadly call a request for reimbursement. And sometimes we use that term to refer to our whole approach. But our first step is a request for reimbursement. It will be a public solicitation by CAA to find out which local governments are interested in being reimbursed for payments. Our second step will be then what we call qualification work here. It'll be interaction with the local government to obtain metrics and data about the recycling program that is happening in that local government area, whether that's a county or a city. And we'll go through an exchange of data before we then enter into a contract or what we call a service agreement here. And the contract itself, we envision that we have a master service agreement, which is our primary tool, kind of covering a lot of general terms and conditions. And then within that, there would be statements of work. So for example, a statement of work for drop-off, a statement of work for collection, and a statement of work for education and outreach services. So these collection agreements, in particular, the collection statement of work will include service standards and basic qualifications that are historically common to the solid waste industry and contracts, and they'll clearly define CAA's minimum service requirements that providers must meet on a continuous basis to receive payments. We're going to talk about a few of those today, particularly the data, or some of the data requirements. For our contracts, we are effectively an exchange of money for data. So reimbursement money, and CAA needs data in order to comply with the Act and report to CDPHE. There will be other aspects to these agreements around claims verification and worker health and safety, data tracking, and other terms that really help support, in some cases, some unique aspects of E&O or drop-off and collection. Okay, so about when are we going to go about this process? So we're initially planning to release 3 requests for reimbursement, processing, local governments, and open market. So you see those boxes on the left here. So we have 3 different themes for our RFR. And we anticipate releasing the local government RFR and the processing RFR this fall. So if you are, as I mentioned earlier, if you're a MRF owner, if you're a local government that owns a MRF or owns a transfer station, you would actually respond to both RFRs. So for collection drop-off and education outreach, it would be through the local government RFR. For the transfer facilities and material recovery, it would be through the processing RFR. They have some different sets of criteria and processes and timing, so that's why we split those 2. So our intention is that the local government RFR is a brief web form that helps CAA capture some core information at the start. We will request detailed information from the local government in those qualification steps, but the initial RFR is intended to be, are you interested? And I'm going to go through a bit of it, but are you interested? Collection, what's your environment? Are you doing it yourself? Are you contracted or not? How do you have, what's your approval process? And can you isolate down to certain types of data? So it'll be actually a pretty quick form to help you get started. And again, we want to issue that this fall. We would go into the qualification work after the plan is approved in the first quarter, leading towards work with your local government on contracting, with the goal that we could hopefully enter into a contract for reimbursement with payments in the second half of the year. Now, the RFR does not technically close, but there is a point in the first quarter where CAA must focus on the requests we've received. So local governments can continue to submit their requests for reimbursement, but our focus will be on those that we've received by a certain date. So subscribe to our newsletter. There'll be a link for that later. That will be one of the ways we may communicate what that timing is. So we anticipate an RFR for open market as well, which are primarily services in open markets, including residential collection, HOA, and large multifamily collection. This is staged later in time, and the target for that will be private service providers who are offering those services. It's not a focus of today's webinar. We do touch on it, but we'll have more information in the future on that open market RFR. So a final note here on this slide, these are the objectives and the milestones we're hoping to accomplish and what we are working towards. But as Rachel mentioned earlier, we do not have an approved program plan. So keep in mind this information here, this timing, and our goal to when we would like to begin payments. This is a draft. And keep in mind, this is a draft until the plan is approved. And that goes for most of the information communicated today. We are doing this to help you get started and get ahead and get thinking, but it could always be potentially subject to change. Okay, so I mentioned that kind of qualification stage. The RFR is going to be fairly light. We're going to ask some high-level questions because we want to understand who you are and how to get going with you. But when we enter the qualification stage, we're going to have much more details that we want to focus on. So what type of factors could help CAA and the local government expedite to a contract? So listed here, I have several factors that we think may help advance from the RFR to a contract. So I'm going to go through them here and just walk right through them. So one thing to consider is, can you access and regularly report operational data to CAA, such as scale ticket data, number of households served, and tonnage collected? Can you isolate net costs of recycling services from other waste management costs? Our obligations for the cost of recycling services, not for the cost of solid waste, not for the cost of organic or green waste collection. What are your jurisdiction steps and approvals needed to establish a contract with CAA? Everyone's different. We want to know, and we'll be asking these types of questions in the RFR. What's the process? How long do you think it might take? Who are the approvals necessary? And who are the primary decision makers? And are they supportive of your jurisdiction's participation? So these are some core questions that we think you should start thinking about and working towards. So when we enter that qualification period after your RFR response, we can expedite as quickly as possible towards a contract. All right, we're going to get into scenarios. Take a sip of water here from my recycling mug first, for my vocal cords. And we're going to talk now a bit about a few different scenarios and sub-scenarios, because there's a lot of different ways that local governments are involved in recycling in Colorado. So we're going to talk about local government collection, where a local government may operate its own fleet. We'll talk about contracted collection, where a local government may have contracted out the collection to a private service provider. And we will also talk a bit about the open market collection, because even though that is an interaction between CAA and the private providers, there is a role for local governments to play. Okay, there we go. Okay, so the first one we're going to jump into is local government operated collection. So in this case, where a curbside collection is provided directly by the jurisdiction or the local government through an operated collection fleet. So an example here might be the city of Denver, I think the city of Longmont, and others. So in this case, currently, the residents pay the city for the service, and the city manages and operates the service. So that payment could be through taxes, through a general fund, a direct bill, an enterprise fund. There's going to be different ways that's being done. But in this case, our focus is really, who's operating the assets, and that's the city, and who's paying for it, and that's the city. So our goal is to enter into a contract with the city in which CAA reimburses for the costs of the collection, and in exchange, we receive data from the city that allows us to report to CDPHE and to operate our compliance for the producers. So we're going to get into some more details here on this one. There's a lot going on this slide. I'll talk through it. Remember, there's references here to the plan proposal that you can look at later. So what are some examples in here? First, I put from the plan the formula for the reimbursement for cities that operate their own fleet. So what we're really looking at is, what are the actual costs for the collection, and can we reimburse for those actual costs? And those would be eligible actual costs. So at a high level, that includes operating expenses, capital expenses, debt service, some education and outreach expenses, and potentially material processing. So operating expenses is a large category. It includes both variable and the variable expenditures for collection of materials from covered entities and the fixed costs of the service provision. It can include labor, truck drivers, helpers, customer service, supervisors and management directly related to the recycling services, utilities, insurance, etc. You'll find a list of some of these in the section 6.5 if you'd like to go in deeper. It can also include administrative costs incurred by the local government direct and indirect support of the recycling services. The capital costs include the portion of the amortized capital cost of collection equipment, trucks, facilities, etc. Any grants that have been or that are being received for capital improvements, we would subtract those out, so there wouldn't necessarily be any double payments. I mentioned debt service on here. That includes payments for interest and principal and debt obligations used for the recycling services. So this is specific again to the recycling services. Education and outreach expenses in our collection contracts, we will have what is effectively a basic form of education and outreach that we expect any collector to do, whether it's open market or the city. And these are pretty direct things such as welcome guides, accepted material lists, annual notices, and keeping the website up to date. That's an expense that's included in here. We're going to talk about more later. Material processing. So CAA will pay the net processing costs at an approved CAA approved transfer or material recovery facility. We want to work with those MRFs to pay for the processing fee, but there will be exceptions where local government may already have a contract in place with a MRF for material processing. And in this case, we assume that the local government will continue with that contract, directly paying the MRF processing fees, and CAA would reimburse those costs. I kind of touched on other income earlier. That's something like the grants. And it could also be, let's see, maybe cart sales or some other funding sources themselves. So we just want to make sure we're not double paying there. So those are items we will discuss in our qualification with you. Some local governments may not have isolated recycling costs for services for recycling, and that's understandable. We did mention in our plan that there's a potential to calculate those or model them, and we can work with that. But we do want to work with you on a plan over time to get to the actual costs as well. We certainly understand that the environments around this we're all coming in at different points of time with different levels of accounting. But it is a long-term goal to work with you to get to actual costs. The data activity reports themselves, which are on the right. This is an example of some of the data that may be reported back to CAA to receive payment. So start thinking about the collection system's easy, like is it single stream, dual stream? That's easier to report. The number of households that are being served, the weights that are being collected, where it's going, the communities that are being serviced, the dates and times of the services, and the route numbers and potentially the processing fees. This is more information that we will bring to bear as we get into our engagement on the contracts. Okay, so I'm going to shift now to a contracted collection where the residents may be billed by the city or one of the city's funds. So in this case, the local government contracts a collector to provide recycling, but the government itself is doing the billing. So these contracts have been obtained through an open procurement process, and CAA will certainly want to honor those contracts. So we will establish a service agreement with the local government to pay for the costs of the existing contract. We will require isolated recycling costs. So if there is a contract set up with bundled collection, like pay as you throw, for example, we want, again, those isolated recycling costs, not the the solid waste costs or the other costs. So there are the formulas at the bottom here, as well as the environment in blue that we desire. And that is, we establish a contract with the city. We reimburse the city's costs for the contract, and the city will report the data to us. So that is something to keep in mind. This is probably a good note to begin collaborating with or talking to your contracted service provider about what might be needed when we want to get this information in the qualification stage. There is an administrative fee in that calculation. We certainly understand that we may be adding some administrative burden. And there's also education outreach in that calculation from the program plan. We assume that E&O is required in most cities' contracts, and that probably meets our minimum service requirements. But if it doesn't, we may have to have an adjustment there as well. So there's a little bit of a wrinkle on this one in a contracted collection environment. What if the local government has a contract and but the hauler is the one that's billing the resident? And that does occur. It's a bit infrequent, but it does occur. So it's an interesting scenario for us. In this case, we need a close collaboration between the local government, the hauler contractor, and CAA. And per what we said in the act, we want to transfer the role of the payment from the resident to CAA. But we anticipate that there may need to be a service agreement and the data and reporting and payment pathway between CAA and the contracted collector. This is certainly an area we need more work on. We'd like to talk more with these types of cities and these types of haulers to work through this. So in this case, we may have that contract set up between the hauler and CAA and to satisfy the act. So I'm going to talk here a bit on both examples. They're all contracted collection. The data activity reports would look very similar or are the same as I mentioned earlier for the city collection. I just want a reminder on the collection costs would include isolated recycling costs and potentially material processing as well. That might be built in there too. So we need to work with you, the local government, and the contractor on making sure we understand what those processing costs are and how they're represented in the kind of per household rate as well. Okay, whoops, I skipped that there. So we got about 5 to 7 more minutes or so. I'm going to cover a few more things, and then we can get into some questions. But let's talk about open markets. So what if you're a city or a county and you're in an area without recycling services provided by the local government? It's most likely an open market. And this is where the resident who desires recycling collection services obtains that directly from a private service provider. So CAA will work directly with the private service providers in open markets to move that bill from the resident to CAA. So we will establish a contract for payment of recycling collection services for those who currently receive material. And we're going to encourage service providers to expand curbside services to residents in these areas who may have curbside trash, but are not participating in recycling. So we anticipate publishing more information on open market collection in the first quarter of 2026, as I mentioned earlier. And keep in mind, private service providers will respond to the open market RFR, not local governments. But as a local government in the open market, how can you participate? Well, there are certainly a few things you can do. First, help CAA connect with the solid waste and recycling haulers in your region. We'd like to know who they are. Maybe you license them and have a list, or you interact with them in your community. We would love to connect with them, educate them on the program, and include them in that open market RFR. But we do encourage you as a local government to respond to our local government RFR this fall, because you may have recycling drop-off or you may want to do education and outreach, and we do want to pay for those services as well. So two more scenarios, or three more actually, to go here. What if I'm in an area or a local government in an area with limited or no recycling service? For example, there may only be curbside trash collection, or there may only be like a solid waste drop off in the geographic area. But again, we want to hear from you in this RFR. We want you to apply through it. We want to meet with you. We want to learn about what you need, how your community operates, and then we want to work with you to develop a long-term plan to help address those gaps. So let's talk about drop-off, where a resident may bring covered materials to separate or drop off for future processing. So in this case, we'll have a contract between CAA and the city to pay for what are effectively the actual costs, very similar to the eligible costs I described before for the municipal hauling environment. So these costs, though, are attributable to the management of covered materials. So keep in mind, CAA is not obligated to cover the cost of hard to recycle items like e-waste, household hazardous waste, or bulky materials. So we will work with the local government to set up a contract to pay for the direct costs for managing the covered materials. And that could certainly also be, if you outsource that, we would work with you to help cover costs attributable to cover materials from that contract. Now, a few notes on drop-offs. The recycling drop-offs most likely are eligible for reimbursement, but initially we're going to be focused on evaluating existing drop-off sites, primarily by whether they service covered residential entities that do not receive curbside collection. So it's our intention to initially include the public drop-off sites that service residential covered entities without curbside collection. But for those in areas where there is curbside, we're going to evaluate eligibility based on a few criteria. This may include the ability to track residential and non-residential materials, the quantity and quality of materials accepted, the proportion of covered materials from covered entities, and the collection of other AML materials at drop-off, as well as costs. So we're going to make our best efforts to include public drop-offs for reimbursement, but we're going to reserve the right to ensure our program efficiencies as well. Okay, education and outreach. So I mentioned earlier, collection and service agreements have certain requirements for education outreach for startup and ongoing instructions to residents, and that reimbursement is included in the collection formulas. But with that said, we recognize the important role that local governments have in the community, and we want to collaborate with local governments to tailor education and outreach activities to individual communities to provide customizable messages, messaging, and resources to support local public E&O. So communities may choose to enter into an E&O or education and outreach service agreement with CAA. And if desired, multiple communities could collaborate, for example, through an intergovernmental agreement to choose to work together to conduct local E&O, and that could enter into contract with CAA. This is information we're going to be asking for in that local government RFR process. So would you like to participate in this community level activity with some of the activities listed here on the slide? For those who opt out of the service agreements or don't want to, or don't respond to the RFR or don't want to participate in E&O, do know that CAA Colorado will work with a local or regional third-party provider to conduct local E&O in that region on their behalf. So with that said, hold the date. There is a webinar coming on the 9th for E&O. So we'll get you more information for that at the end of this presentation. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up here on next steps before we go to questions. So how to prepare for the reimbursement process. First, I mentioned earlier, I highly recommend you read the plan. It's available on CDPHE's website as well, and Chapter 6 in particular. There's also another point in there, I think it's Figure 3, that's before Chapter 6. It kind of gives you a sense of the timing of how we're trying to address existing services versus areas where there is access but lower participation versus areas where it's going to take a lot more infrastructure development and potentially a longer time. So I encourage you to dig into that. And then second, this kind of goes back to what I mentioned in our qualifications. Consider how your community wants to participate and what staff and resources are needed to engage. Those points I made earlier were, can you access and regularly report operational data to CA, like scale ticket type of data, number of households served, tonnage collected? Can you isolate the net costs of recycling? What are your steps for approval? How long will they take? Who are the primary decision makers? And are they supportive of your jurisdiction's participation? And then third, as a reminder, join us for the E&O webinar on Tuesday, September 9th. Great. So with that, I am going to leave this up as the last slide for the moment, unless I need to move around. To stay connected with us, sign up for the newsletter, register for the E&O webinar, and then our email there is for you to send in questions or to get in touch with us to meet. So thank you very much. I'll take a pause here and maybe hand it over to Rachel and Morgan.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Rob. So we'll give folks a second just to scan those QR codes if they're interested to sign up for the newsletter. Oh, it looks like those are posted in the chat. And then certainly, if you all do have questions, if you've talked or engaged with your colleagues in your jurisdiction and you're ready to talk to Circular Action Alliance, or maybe you're in an open market and you want to let us know who your local waste haulers are, that coloradoinfo@circularaction.org is a great email address. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop recording so that we can get to question and answer.